Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Natural History Museum. My name is David, your host for today's Nature Live. Now, before we get into the really interesting things in front of us here, can I just ask that mobile phones are either turned off or put on silent? And can I ask that there's no eating or drinking in the studio? Right, now hopefully some of you have been to our Nature Lives before, but if you haven't, I'll very quickly tell you what they're all about. Now every Friday and Saturday and Sunday we run these shows, our Nature Lives, and they're half an hour, and the idea is sort of a sneak peek behind the scenes at the museum, a chance to hear about and to see some of the things you wouldn't normally as you're walking around the museum, because people don't realise there are a lot of people here at the museum working away behind the scenes. That includes 300 scientists that are carrying out important research and looking after our collection. And we're going to bring you one of those stories today. And we have an enormous collection. We've got around 80 million specimens, things in our collection, ranging from animals, plants, meteors, minerals, all sorts of things. But that also includes a collection in our library, where we have just been informed we have around 1 million items just in our library alone, something people perhaps don't associate with the museum. And today we're going to bring you one of those. One book, 3 languages, 1,500 years of history, and the birth of botany. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Hanouf and John, who are going to be bringing us this story today. Thank you so much for coming down. Please don't be shy. This is your chance to find out more about the museum, about the story today, and generally about our collections and science. So pop your hand up at any point if you've got questions, and do come down at the end. Don't touch, I think that's the rule. But look closely at some of these lovely specimens that we've got in front of us. Let's start first of all, John. Thanks for coming down. By telling us a little bit about what we mean when we talk about special books.
Well, a special book, ladies and gentlemen, is something like this. This is an incomplete copy of a very, very special book, but it's a one-off. I say one or two off. There's one in Cambridge. This is, as I say, an incomplete copy of a very, very special book, which is actually held in the National Library of Austria. The book itself, which we're going to be talking about today, is called Codex Juliana Anicia, named after Juliana Anicia, a daughter of a Roman senator in the city we now know as Istanbul, has been known in the past as Constantinople or Byzantium. Basically, Byzantium, Constantinople, Istanbul was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. The citizens spoke Greek but considered themselves Romans, and what the Juliana Codex actually is a collection of the botanical knowledge of the Greek and Roman civilizations, with a bit of an emphasis on the medical. However, contained in the volume is some very familiar concepts, and it's quite surprising those concepts go back quite a few years, quite a few centuries in fact. If we have a look at the first image we've got up here, we've got 2 plants on one page. The Greeks called nettles kanepe, the itch. So we've got 2 species together in a genus. The Greeks called it the genus kanepe, we call it genus urtica. So it's quite, species together in a genus is quite familiar to us, like things in one sort of, in one group.
So you go into the library, for example, today, or most libraries in sort of, botanical departments in universities, and we see loads of these sort of botanical books, these classifications, separating and dividing things up. But this pretty much was the first
pretty
one
much
that we
so,
see.
yes, indeed.
Incredible. And how many years ago was it?
Well, this is 1,500 years old. The Juliana is 1,500 years old. The ideas go back even further. And also there's a question that goes back. The Greeks knew that the world changed, and called it the problem of change. And it produced a question: why are these species so similar? Were they one and the same in the past? Did they have a common ancestor? And that's quite a familiar idea to us, quite a familiar concept, but actually goes back quite deep into time.
So we're seeing the seeds of like evolutionary thinking way further back.
Very
than
much
we
so,
might have
David.
thought.
Yes, very much so.
Interesting. Now, if we look at this beautiful book, and there are many pages that we can pick as an example. This is the Greek, is that right? My Greek is pretty terrible. But this is the Greek here.
Yes.
But we see a couple of different languages here. It almost looks like someone's been
Yes,
scribbling
indeed.
on
Yes,
the
and
sides.
that's where Hanouf comes in.
Now, Hanouf, we've got a few different languages. What languages have we got?
So far we found, obviously there's the Arabic. We also found Persian in the text. Thank you for zooming in. So you might be, before we go into the why is there Arabic there, when was it added, you might be wondering why is there Arabic in the first place in a Greek manuscript. The short answer to this was Arabic was the language of science, and Arabic is not particularly a language that is normally associated with science, maybe a little bit with poetry, but it was the language of science for at least 600 years. That's from the 7th until the 13th century. That's the time when the Islamic Empire spread even into Europe, into Spain. So if you look at this map, and you look, there's the orange, the green, the purple, and the bright red. That's the expand of the Islamic Empire. And Arabic was chosen as a language for scientists across this wide geographic region to communicate with each other.
And why was this movement so important? What sort of new ideas perhaps developed as part of it?
Yes, well, before the Arabic science took hold, there was a very important project that took place, and that's the translation project. And that's at that time considered a global project of translating not just the Greek work. What we're seeing here is an example of the translation of Greek work, but actually the translation of scientific work of all cultures of the world. And that included Persian, Chinese, hieroglyphics, Coptics, and Syriac, and a lot more. And this took place in different centers across the Islamic Empire, but most prominently in Baghdad.
And there was a centre of all this.
Exactly.
It's got a great
So
name, the House of Wisdom.
Exactly, the House of Wisdom, or Beit al-Hikmah in Arabic. And that's one of the very few surviving illustrations that we have of this period. So this was in the 9th century, and what you can see, scientists actively engaging with experimentation. And what's so unique about this picture, and that brings me back to your question, what was the product of this translation movement? The product of it was Islamic science, which was built on sciences of other cultures, but was a bit unique in that it relied on experimentation rather than reasoning. And we see a great example in that picture. That's another one.
And this is, you were talking to me about this before. What's quite interesting is we can see sort of religious headdresses of several different religions, and we're talking about translations from lots of different countries.
Yeah.
And when it's a real example of multiculturalism.
Exactly. And even when I use the words Arabic and Islamic science to describe this period, which is the term that is used, it doesn't mean that was only Arabs and Muslims who were part of this movement. There were definitely people from different cultures and different languages involved in the process.
Excellent. So when we see these bits of writing on the book, it's actually beginning to tell a bit of a story, a social and historic story. And that brings us to your own story, John.
Yes, indeed.
So you have both, I should explain, Hanouf and John have been pouring through this book in absolute detail, trying to pick apart these stories, which we're going to be looking at in a minute. But how did you two start working together on this?
Well, it was quite interesting because I was doing a tour for our science educators, and going back to the Greeks, I had the 1906 photographic copy of the Juliana open, and to my shame, I pointed out the Arabic as being Hebrew. I'm afraid the West is not very well up on Middle Eastern cultures, maybe because our culture is so much based on the Greeks. And Hanouf said, no, that's not. That's Arabic, and I can read it. And it's kind of snowballed from there.
Yes, exactly. And it's a question that John kept on asking me, how can you read Arabic? And I was like, well, Arabic is my first language. What do you mean? But then I realized that he couldn't understand how Arabic remained in terms of scripture unchanged. That's why I can read it. It's not because I have a special skill, but Arabic is still readable, even if it dates back to the 10th century.
And like, say, the English of, say, the Venerable Bede, who's probably a near contemporary of Prophet Muhammad, we never read that.
So when John was showing you this page in particular, and he made his blunder, did you embarrass him there and then, or did you pull him to one side and say, I'm sorry?
No, I just said, I can actually read this, it's this, and he was surprised.
I'm not easily embarrassed.
Excellent. And that's how the project was born. And we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the things that you found so far. But does anyone have a question so far? We've planted the seed of this story. No? They're dying to find out what's coming next. Okay, so talk us through. So you realised there was an opportunity here. John, we've got Hanouf here is able to read some of these extra bits of notation. What is the process then of actually studying this book? What do you do?
I can show you actually,
Yeah, please do.
So, because we've been talking the book and the book, we mean this book. So both of them are photographic copies, not the originals. The originals are in Austria. So what we do, there is the Greek text, like this one here and here. The Greek text has already been studied. It's based on an earlier book, the Dioscorides, and that's been studied and translated into English. You can actually buy it in a book like this one. But the Arabic, unfortunately, has not been studied in that same depth or at all. So we go page by page, we look at the text. So this one here says Huntha, and I'm not going to spoil what that means because John is going to talk about that. And it also has the transliteration of the Greek name. And the transliteration is basically when you write how a word is pronounced from another language using a different alphabet. So these are Arabic letters, but it's not an Arabic word, it's a Greek word. It just helps the reader pronounce that word correctly, with some fascinating Arabic information that I'm not going to spoil at this point. So that's the process, very briefly.
So start with the Greek, look at the translation.
Look at the transliterations, compare it, and what we're really interested in is looking at the additional information that's provided in the Arabic. And by that I mean the Greek text, we know it because it's translated into English, we can read it from the translation, but what information was provided in the Arabic that was not available in the Greek?
Now, when you got a book like this, we're talking about special books, we're bigging it up at the beginning, being the birth of botany. You sort of think someone might have done this already.
Yes.
Has anyone done this at all? Are you working from anyone else's work at all?
Well, I think basically the Arabic was looked at by an Austrian scholar, Carlos Wesley, in 1906, and then again by an Armenian scholar in 1928. We've got a translation in the Austrian scholars, and he actually is quite complimentary about the Arabic scholar. But I think Hanouf is the first Arabic speaker to look at this in centuries.
And the depth as well, it was and the additional information that's provided. I don't think that was provided in the Wesley, at least, reading of the Juliana.
And that's important, isn't it?
Yes.
Because we're sort of we're making a more accurate rewrite of history and acknowledging the contributions people have made. So let's move on to a few of the things. You haven't finished it yet.
No,
it's
not
taken
yet.
a while. A few of the things that you found so far. So what are the extra bits of knowledge that we've encountered?
Well, one particularly, as Hanouf has alluded to,
Yeah.
if we can go to the asphodel.
Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
indeed. That's the asphodel. Very interesting addition. If we can see down there, Huntha, and that means hermaphrodite. Having been sort of relatively trained in history, the big mistake is people often make is look at the past through the eyes of the present, and you have to be very careful. And I was a little bit reticent, a little bit hesitant. But then I thought, well, you think about asphodels, and this is the actual asphodel from the Middle East. We've also got a British asphodel, and the reproductive parts on the flowers are very pronounced. As you can see, the centerpiece is the female part of the reproductive structure, the stigma there, and these anthers on the male parts. So the plant is a hermaphrodite. And I thought, well, okay, maybe that's coincidence. But the liliales group, lilies, the reproductive parts on the flowers are very pronounced. Hand lenses were around at the time, lenses were around at the bottom. You don't really need them, but they could have been there. And if you take the Piccadilly line down to the British Museum and you have a look at the friezes from Babylon, Mesopotamia, you can see what looks like pollination of date palms. Date palms have male and female as male and female separate plants. And basically, it's still around in the Middle East. I think your father actually.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was telling because this was a very interesting conversation I had with John. the understanding sexuality in plants only came in the West in the 17th century. But like John said, when we look back at the Mesopotamian culture, what seems to be artificial pollination, meaning that it means there's an understanding of sexuality in plants, and that dates to 2300 BC.
Okay, so
Yeah,
that's
it wouldn't
far before
Yeah.
we
The
actually see it in the Western
Yeah,
scientific
it's
culture.
actually the late 17th century. It's understood in Europe, but it wouldn't be really that surprising if there was some understanding of sexuality in plants around the Middle East. I mean, biotechnology agriculture really started around Iraq, Tigris, Euphrates, one of the three sort of centres where it started. It wouldn't be that surprising. So my reticence have kind of moved back, and obviously that's something we're going to look at. That's a real possibility.
That's quite exciting, isn't it? That,
Yes,
we
indeed,
talked
yeah.
a bit, about sort of retelling our understanding of history and where these ideas developed, and the credit we can shift it to sort of perhaps where it's more deserved. Okay, excellent. So that's one of the things that we found. Was there anything else that we've sort of learned about science at this time?
Basically, I think the Juliana is also a biological record. Very little interesting little happening was that I actually work in the British and Irish seed plant herbarium, and this specimen came in rather unidentified. And I thought, well, how am I going to identify that? There's various keys, and I kind of put it to one side. Anyway, we were going through it was the first few times we went through the first few pages, and this specimen came up. This is in the same genus as the one I couldn't identify. And this is it on the screen, and it's actually Cynodon dactylon, which is actually an invasive species to Britain. And so the Juliana is effectively the first record of many, many species, and it tells us how species have moved around the world. And
So it's still doing its job 1,500 years later, telling
David,
us
yes,
what things are,
pointing
which
out
is
my
fantastic.
inadequacies as a botanist, I'm afraid. It's
But another thing that the book was able to do is actually give us an idea of some of the, perhaps the ideas of the properties that these plants
Medicinal
have, some of the medicinal properties as well. Tell us a little bit about this, Hanif, what you found.
Yeah, so for example, on this plant, it says the word halibi underneath the plant name. The one underneath it, yeah. So the word halibi, which actually means urethral, and it's alluding to the use of this plant for probably urinary tract infections and things like that. And then when we look back at the Greek text, so this is how we do it again. We look back at the Greek text, there is no mentioning of the medicinal use of that plant for this disease or these problems. So that's additional information, just to give you an example of additional information that we can find by looking at the Juliana in depth.
Excellent. And you're finding these
all the time. These are just
Yeah.
two
Okay.
examples, but we find these all the time, yeah.
And
Purdue
and-
University are interested in
Sorry?
Purdue University in the United States are interested in this. In that they've got a website, and
Purdue.
Purdue, yes,
Yeah.
indeed, yes,
Fantastic. So we're
Yeah,
going hopefully
probably,
this will be
yes.
coming out perhaps as a paper at some point.
yes, indeed.
Has anyone got any questions at all before we carry on with our presentation? Doesn't necessarily have to be sticking to this. You can test our scientist a little bit further afield if you like. Okay, no problem. Oh yes, we've got a question at the top.
What you're describing, like a second edition.
Good question. Yeah,
Second
we
edition of
of the book, the Codex?
Instead of reprinting the whole book again,
yeah.
what's happened is over time, other cultures.
Yeah, so when we go back to the process, the translation project, what they did, so the Arabic scientists respected the science of Greeks and other cultures. So they maintained the original manuscripts to start with, and they added to it their notes, added some. That was the start of it, but then eventually with more science pouring in from different parts of the world into Arabic, they were able to produce their own sciences. And if I show you very briefly this is just an example of, and that's just one volume of a Persian scientist who developed a medical encyclopedia. And it was so important that was used not only in the Islamic world, but also in the European universities for 600 years. So, and that's just one volume. That's a book that you can actually buy in most Arabic countries today. So yes, they respected it, they kept the text, but then they added to it and produced new science as well.
Sort of like an unofficial new versions of these,
Yes,
adding to
I
it.
think we're also in the digital age now, and it's definitely worth another look because we're finding things out on the internet.
Yes, yeah.
So the Kurdish,
Cultural uses of
yes,
plants.
indeed,
yeah.
yes, which
Yes, please.
So why wasn't this investigated for all this time? Like this, the addition of the Arabic text.
I have an answer, and you have one as well. I'll do my part. From
Yeah.
my understanding, or we can't be 100% certain. My understanding, you need someone to understand the language itself. So if Arabic is not an easy language to understand, unless you have it, then that information is lost to you. So you need someone in the sciences who understands Arabic and has an interest to carry out this research and to study it. Yeah. So that's my part. I know you have something else to add as well.
well, I think also maybe the sheer sort of politics. Unfortunately, the Mongol invasions did huge damage to the Islamic world
Yeah.
and to the Islamic universities. The House of Wisdom was actually sacked and destroyed by the Mongols.
Yeah.
And I think we in the West don't realise what, how really what happened.
And it was quite interesting. It was just an accidental thing that happened here.
Yeah,
When we talk
yeah, it
about
wasn't planned,
multiculturalism.
yeah.
It was the fact that the museum has people from lots of different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Fortunately,
Yeah.
you were able to sort of spot
Yes.
this, and the project
What
began.
was interesting as well is that Arabic kind of doesn't lend itself to printing as well as it does, say, Latin.
Yes.
That is another factor that's come in.
So when printing was invented
Yeah.
in the West,
Yeah.
Arabic didn't follow because
Yeah,
it was,
we had the example of the Quran in Venice,
yes.
that it didn't quite lend itself to printing as well as Latin did.
Well, we've got 5 minutes left. I think we've talked about the value that we found of this added information. I think it's only fair if we sort of give a bit of credit to these Arabic scholars. Do
Yeah.
we know who these people were that were writing these sort of extra bits of information?
Unfortunately, in this case, we don't. We have some clues in the text that we've been using to work out two things. First of all, when was the Arabic added and who added it?
What are the clues that we
The
might
clues. So so obviously it's not been researched properly, so I can't really depend on research. So I had to depend on the text itself, the Arabic. And I thought, well, maybe the best way is to look at the evolution of Arabic calligraphy itself, how it changed over time. And this is an example of different writing styles of Arabic. It all says the same thing, al-khat lisan al-yad, which means calligraphy is the tongue of the hand. It's just an expressive.
That's nice.
I know, we love poetry. And it's written different styles, and these styles evolved at different times.
So you've got the oldest one at the top.
the
here.
oldest one at the top, and that's a cursive type of writing, which isn't very easy to use if you want to copy manuscript. So a new form of writing evolved in the 10th century, which is this one you're pointing to, and that's the cursive style of writing, or nasikh. And it was particularly invented to make the copying of manuscripts easy. And so that's one clue. The other thing is the use of diacritics. And diacritics are basically the lines and the dots on top of the letters. That was introduced in the 8th century to Arabic scripture. So combining both, we know this was written 10th century onwards. So that's our, but as we read more and we complete the manuscript, we might find more clues to help us narrow down that time period.
So there's a bit of detective work,
Yes.
but at least you can, as you say, you can narrow these down.
Yeah,
And
I
it's-
think we're also going to be looking at the other, what are called Byzantine codices,
Yes.
the other Greek codexes. Juliana is obviously oldest. It's probably the oldest. I'd say it's the oldest complete surviving botanical work. The Codex Neapolitanensis, which the V&A has a copy of as it's a work of art, again has Arabic additions to it. So we're going to be looking at that.
Yes. Yeah.
And also an actual genuine Arabic herbal in the British Museum.
Brilliant. So this might not be the end of the project.
No.
Certainly not now.
No, so we were able to narrow the time down a little bit. Are there any other clues
Yes, for
that we
the-
can
for the-
find about who wrote these?
Yes. So again, it would have been a lot easier if we had like the name of the person on the first page.
Why
of
didn't
the
they
map.
just write their
Write
name?
down their name? Yeah, exactly, they didn't. So we use this is an example of one of the plants in the manuscripts, and it says underneath it in Arabic, it says "La yujad fi biladina," it means it's not found in our region. And this is what is known as the Syrian carrot, common name in English. And the Syrian, and by Syrian we mean at that time would have been places from Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Jordan. And the fact that whoever wrote the Arabic said it's not found in our countries, referring to that region. That means the person was probably not from that region, okay, or at least unfamiliar with that region. So that's one clue. There's another clue as well if we have time for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've already had a quick look at this. Was
Yes.
the grass that we mentioned
Yes,
earlier,
indeed,
wasn't it?
yes.
Yeah, okay.
And again, the Arabic here gives four common names, which is Thayal, Najm, Najal, Ayraq. This is a type of grass with 4 different common names. And these are common names that are still used today. So I know this because I know where these words are being used in different parts of the Arabic world. So the fact that the person is given 4 common names and not just one means 2 things. That the person is, A, could be very well traveled in the regions, that he knows those common names and how they're used differently. By combining all of that, we think, and the fact that there is Persian as well in the text and not just Arabic, we think that the person could be either from Iraq or Iran, but we're not sure. We still need to continue our work.
So how much more of the book, the Codex, Juliana Codex, have you got to look through? How much have you completed already, John?
I think we're about 40% to go.
40% to go,
Yeah,
okay.
and then there's the other things, the other codices.
Okay, but so there might be these
Yes,
extra
indeed.
clues
It's going
about
to
the
be interesting in
identity
particular to
of the
see
scholar.
if we can find any more things like Huntha.
Fantastic. Right, now we've got a couple of minutes left, so it'd be nice to finish trying to sort of get from both of you why you think this project is so important, why we should be doing this.
Basically, it's new information, maybe lost information. As I say, maybe it's a personal opinion. We don't really know. We know that we don't really understand in the West the achievements it is, the golden age of Islam, and how dramatically it ended. And there may be lost information there, which is good for everybody. Science is multicultural. That's the message.
Yeah.
Hanu?
Well, to add on to that as well, I'm personally, of course, the multiculturalism aspect of science is very, very interesting. But also, if you think of these manuscripts, so this is an example of one manuscript. Each one had its own journey, and I think each journey is merits its own discovery and unfolding to understand it with all of its detail. So it's a journey of science across cultures, and this is what it represents to me. Any page from this manuscript has at least 3 cultures that come together for the one purpose, and that's to study science, and particularly plants. And these cultures were separated geographically, separated by time, but they had one purpose. And I think there's such a strong message in that, and that's what keeps me and John going and hoping to discover a bit more.
You still enjoying it?
Yes.
And you're still friends?
Yes, indeed.
Excellent. That's good.
But
Good to hear.
only one mention of history. Only one mention of history.
If you get John going on the right path,
Yeah,
he knows more about history than I think anyone I've met.
I don't know.
Thank you so much,
Thank you very
guys.
much.
It's a story which is ongoing. It's also a story that features in the latest copy of the museum's magazine Evolve. So if this has given you a bit of a taste, do go and check that out. And this isn't just a plug, but they are available from the museum shop. I've read it. It's a fantastic, going into a little bit more detail, covering some of the things that we've talked about, but also a few new things as well. If you've got any questions and want to take a closer look at these lovely books that have been kindly brought out to us today, please come down and take a closer look and have a chat with these guys. I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you. But if you'd like to join me in saying thank you for really lovely Nature Live today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you.